Hello, everyone. It's nice to come home. I'm excited about being home even for a few hours. I want to start off by thanking Jamie and recognizing her for her vision. I've worked in this field, probably the mental health field, over 30 years. And I've always felt like we needed this in the high schools, the colleges as well, some mental skills training for athletes. It seemed like they spent a lot of money and a lot of revenue on every aspect of the athlete except for his mental state and how that affects his performance. And so it was kind of a divine communication between Jamie and I. We got hooked up through a mutual friend of mine, an old family friend, and who knows that I was doing this for a while. And so it just kind of happened. I want to congratulate Jamie on the fact that I've never met anybody in the medical field that is this passionate about this program. I've worked with a lot of athletic directors at the college level, high school level. There is some buy-in. A lot of it has to do with lack of revenue to introduce this. In fact, many of you probably know this already, but there's probably about a dozen Power 5 schools, a dozen schools, including Power 5 schools, that actually have a psychological education program. I don't know if that shocks you or not. It sure shocks me. High schools are certainly open to what we're doing. I am involved in many high schools and colleges. A lot of it is pro bono work because they just lack the budgets for it, especially in the high school level. So as Jamie said, I've been in this business probably about 25 years, been a licensed therapist for over 30. But I actually can relate to the athlete because many of you can relate to this. You all played sports in high school. I played everything they offered. If it was a ball or we involved running, I was involved in it. And so, lucky enough to play college baseball at Nichols to get me through school as far as the tuition was concerned. It helped out. I always felt like I wanted to be a part of it even after I finished playing. It's just something I'm very passionate about, and I always found a way in my career to try to get associated with the athletes. 25 years ago, there was not much interest or availability for a sports counselor. The stigmatization is still there to be working with athletes in the mental health field. We're trying to break those barriers down, and I believe there's one particular program that has actually done a really good job in breaking those walls down in the stigma. Many of you know who Nick Saban is. He was the first college coach that really felt there needed to be some emphasis on psychological education for athletes. He was interested in bringing on a group of people. He actually has 6 mental conditioning coaches now, all do various things. He was interested in, he was interested in winning, which is why he brought him on. But he learned through, he learned through many people in my industry that there had to be some emphasis on psychological education so he could have that edge. Nick Saban is always looking for an edge. If you ever had the time to speak with him, he is always looking for an edge. I'll tell you a quick story. When he came over to Notre Dame, I had been at Notre Dame for about 8 years as their guidance counselor. He came over there to recruit an athlete. And when he got there, he told me, he said, I don't want to know how good he is. I don't know what his ability level is. I don't care to talk about whether he's an exceptional athlete yet. I want to see his grades. I want to know if he's good character, and I want to know that he's a team player in the locker room. And did his thing. 5 minutes, he was gone. Years later, I attended a clinic with him. I was fortunate enough to go with the Notre Dame coaches to go to his coaching clinic. And he came to our table, and he remembered meeting me, and I asked him, why did you approach it that way? Why did you not want to talk about what kind of ability he had? He said, listen, we're all recruiting the same level of athletes. They're all 5 stars, 4 stars, got to be explosive, got to be fast, got to be talented. He said, the reason I'm asking about character first is because if I'm recruiting this guy with high character and somebody else is recruiting somebody with lower character, I already have a jump on him. I don't have to develop that kid to the character level that I need to roll with. He said, right there, I already have an edge. And if you know Nick, he's always looking for an edge and usually works to get one. So His emphasis on that was probably the spearheaded this whole movement and lowering the bar of the stigma to try to get at conditioning coaches. That and the number of professional players who are widely expressing that they're using these types of mental conditioning coaches. So that being said, most recently I've been working with the Notre Dame team and many schools in that Lafayette area, St. Thomas More, Turlings. A couple of years ago, I was living in Texas, and I got to work with SMU's tennis team, where I learned a lot from a lot of colleagues that work with Nick. And so I'll be referencing, it might not be a lot of Alabama fans in here, but I'll be just referencing some of the things that they're doing. Yeah, you go, Roll Tide. So,
don't be crazy, Terry.
yeah, I know, I'm in Tiger country. I got to remember where I'm at. And please don't take it out on me that I went to E.D. White either. I happen to be friends with a lot of Vanderbilt people even today. So because when Jamie spoke with me about coming today, because I wasn't sure about a specific topic that we wanted to cover, by the way, I want this to be a real interactive session. So what I thought I would do is start off with walking you through how I actually work with the athlete, what processes I use to work with them, and then we can get into some of the things. Jamie mentioned that you might want some ideas of what you can do with your athletes yourselves. So I have some flyers and things there and some handouts and some worksheets of things that you can actually do with your athletes. Now, I realize this from working with a lot of college programs, and especially college programs and high school programs. You don't have a lot of time to do a lot of mental conditioning. Just by a show of hands, or maybe somebody would want to volunteer, what would be the reason that you wouldn't spend a lot of time on the mental conditioning aspect of the game? It may be that you don't have time. It may be that maybe the knowledge is not there for you and your coaching staff. Anybody want to volunteer why they're not introducing that into their program now? Anybody like to say? Best guess?
Unfamiliar. Yeah, lack of knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Lack of knowledge.
That's the biggest feedback I get. Just don't know
Yeah.
where to start.
Yeah, not sure. Oh, yes, sir.
I would say I'm a new head coach, but we actually brought in a mental coach this summer. We did one session with them already.
Right.
Athletes loved it, the boys loved it.
It's obvious. Yes, sir.
I would say, plus you talk about him talking about who he's going to recruit. I'm telling you, when I pick a team, if I know a kid's a turkey, I'm not keeping him on my team. So I'm going to look for better character people, because if you get a better character kid, I can get him to do what I need him to do. You know what I'm saying? Whereas if it's a turkey, he's not going to listen to you anyway.
Right. Yes, sir. And that's real common, and I'm going to share with you a little later in the program how we got Notre Dame athletes to buy in, what we did. We created a language, and then we built off sort of an alphabet from that language, and we got them to buy. But I'll share that. I call it the illusion of choice and how we got buy-in there.
As coaches do quite a bit of mental coaching, probably not at the depth that
Yeah.
you're going to teach us or explain to us.
Sure. Would everybody agree that there's some need on your program? You might be thinking of an athlete or two who could benefit from some mental conditioning training. Okay, so now I got to say this at the start. I do not do anything clinical, although I'm qualified to work with them clinically. I do not work with mental illness when it comes to athletes. I don't do anything clinical. What we offer athletes is some very basic common sense skills to improve confidence, eliminate perfection, fear of failure, all these things. When you think of an athlete that might be struggling with some skills, what do you think of? Low confidence, right? Fear of failure, social approval, possibly from parents. Sometimes coaches can expect a lot from athletes. So those are the types of skills that I build. Confidence is the foundational brick that everything is built on. And so I look at confidence, focus. I teach kids my formula for success with kids is no expectations, which is the same as outcomes. You may have heard coaches talk about process goals, right, instead of outcomes. So we're going to talk about how expectations can chip at confidence in a second. We'll walk through that. But no expectations. I try to eliminate expectations or outcomes. I try to build extremely high, stable confidence. for competition, and then we replace expectations with what I call manageable process goals. This whole idea of mental conditioning is the goal is to do one thing with the athlete, get them to play in the moment. Now that sounds easy, but there's so many things that distract players over the course of a game, right? Over the course of a competition. Most of them are external. Weather, referees, heckling, name it. Sometimes their own coaches can throw them off track. So we replace all these expectations and all these distractions with process goals. Again, if you've heard anything, any kind of recordings or YouTubes or interviews with Nick Saban, he talks about working the process. He's not the first one that came up with that language, but actually he uses it quite a bit. So those are the things that I focus on with athletes. I do not do any kind of mental health counseling. It's important you know that, because any referrals that come in, I wouldn't be able to work with them on that. What I thought we'd do at the beginning, I actually want to walk through the process of what I do from the very beginning with an athlete. Once I get a referral, it could be a team, it could be an individual from a coach. So the first thing I do, I have a system that I work with. It's based on an assessment tool. It's based on a summary and a mental game plan that I create for the athlete. It's individualized, it's specific, it's tailor-made for them. The same could be done with teams. I can come in and do a tailor-made mental conditioning program for your athletes as well, for the whole team. So I do team seminars and workshops too, but for the sake of this example, I'm going to use something that the tool I'm going to explain. You don't have actually the assessment, but you have the mental game plan. This is an athlete, Marcus. Marcus was, he was referred to me through SMU's tennis team. Marcus was a top 5 amateur in the country, in the world actually. He was a top 5 tennis player at SMU. He was from Russia. Bless you, sir. He was from Russia, and so they called me in to work with him. So based on Marcus's assessment, you have in front of you, it says AMAP, summary and mental game plan. These are the types of things that I'll lay out and create for the individual athlete. So it's important to really target and drill down on some of the needs that he has. So if you follow along, I'm not going to go through every one, but this is a typical summary. So I'll create this summary based on this assessment. The assessment's 20 questions. It's 2 parts. They'll fill it out, and it'll really give me an idea what mental skills we need to address, what mental conditioning skills we need to work on. So with Marcus, you'll see his goals would be an All-American tennis player honors, improve focus and practice, increase motivation and commitment to independent practice and serves. So I summarized, based on what he gave me on his assessment, I summarized all the areas that we need to work on. Okay, and you'll see that there. So each athlete that I work with, I'll do that for them. It's a custom-made mental game plan based on his needs. So we narrowed it down to some key coaching areas that we needed to look at. The mental game plan for Marcus. It's important that you look at that part, because you'll see that not only do I highlight the areas that are targeted, I also include some strategies there. So if you have an athlete that needs something, I want you to see that there's some strategies that we're actually going to apply. Now, what do we use to do that? I'm going to pass these around. When I work with athletes, we'll have a session and we'll target these areas. I supply them with a lot of documents, because remember, they don't have a lot of time, right? They have practice, they have study hall, they have a lot going on. They have classes to study for. They have a lot to do. Some of them are training or getting rehab or something from an injury. We might have 30 minutes if we're lucky. Which brings me to this. That's another reason why a lot of mental conditioning coaches are not being used. Oftentimes, they'll call me and they say, well, you have 8:30 at night because they got to go to study hall. When they finish study hall and supper, then you got them. Or I'll walk in if they got 5 minutes. Coaches will say, you got 5 minutes with them, right? There's times for X's and O's, and they don't have a lot of time for this. So I have to really be efficient when I work with an athlete. So I have a system with this where not only do we target the areas, I give them workbooks and worksheets and everything else, many of which you have in your folders. I actually developed a workbook system. It's a 15 workbook lesson plan that targets each individual. So if I'm trying to build confidence, I'm going to pass these around so everybody can see them. If you want to just take a look at them, these supplement. Thank you, Jamie. Y'all can just distribute around, kind of get an idea of what I use with athletes. Athletes will take this workbook home. We'll give them homework. It's easily completed. I'll give them a section or something. What's cool about these particular workbooks is that I have one for each subject area. I have one for confidence. I have one for focus. They have some handouts in there. They have some exercises in there. Now, the reason that's really helpful is that they can complete these and be prepared when they come back, and it accelerates learning for them. So as a mental conditioning coach, you have to learn to be real efficient because you don't have a lot of time with them. So those workbooks will give you an idea of how they actually follow the program. And, you know, it's kind of by default that those were developed because I felt like we didn't have a lot of time. We have to speed this up and get them to really be locked in when they get back to the next session. So you'll see Marcus has about, I think, 7 or 8 areas that we worked on. Each one of these areas are reflected in those workbooks. So let's take confidence. Since confidence is such a huge and probably the biggest area, probably the most common area that I work with athletes, let's look at confidence. Formula for success, no expectations, high confidence, manageable goals. How did we work on confidence? I have a confidence connection handbook. I want to talk about that for a few minutes. I'd like you, if you're going to read anything in this booklet, in this folder, I'd like you to read the confidence connection handbook. 90% of my athletes are struggling with confidence issues and outcomes. And so I usually start off with that with an athlete because it shows up so common in the AMAP, profile that I'm using. So I want to talk about expectations, and this is something y'all can chime in on. A lot of coaches will tell me, I want my kids to expect to win. And I guess when you have a program, you know, I'm going to reference Notre Dame, they have a pretty good history of winning there. And before I got there, they had a sign up on the wall, expect to win. That is a plus and a minus, and I'll tell you how it's a minus. A lot of kids that I talk with, college level, even professional golfers, expectations are really sort of based on judgments and based on demands and judgments that you place on yourself. Like, I use an athlete, a baseball player. A baseball player might say, I expect to throw a no-hitter. Okay? It's a good goal, right? But then they place strict judgments on that, and if they have a bad inning or a couple of bad innings, couple of home runs, it starts to sort of affect the way they see themselves in terms of confidence, right? Can you see how that can happen? If they are expecting to throw a no-hitter and they have a bad inning, they're going to start questioning, man, maybe I don't have it today. Maybe it's just not my day. Maybe I don't have the ability that I thought I had. And so what you start to see is those expectations start to chip and undermine confidence. So the connection is not always a positive one. So what I try to do with athletes is to try to eliminate those expectations and focus on process goals instead. So we all know confidence is based on a knowledge or an ability that you can perform a task or a goal or perform well. So if you think you're expecting and you're placing judgments on yourselves, you sort of place yourself in a no-win situation, or you paint yourself in a corner that if it doesn't happen, then I start to tank. I've seen it all the time. I can watch the body language of an athlete on the mound, and I know when it's time for the coach to pull him up because I know he's lost his confidence. So there's a confidence expectation connection that could be sort of negative and sort of disadvantageous to the athlete. So what I try to do is help them understand that connection and replace the expectations with high, stable confidence and some process goals. Yes, ma'am.
So, Terry, because as a coach, when I coach, I always lay out expectations. like that. And that's how I was coached. This is our expectations. These are our goals for the season. Is this just a jargon change? Like, are we just using different words?
Yeah,
Are we saying process, goal, not expectation, or is it a whole different thought process?
I would rather them not have expectations. Now, goals are fine because goals can be moved and adjusted. Expectations, when they have absolute expectations, like I must throw a no-hitter today, or I'm not going to get drafted, or I'm not going to get the approval of my coach, or I'm going to get pulled, that's fine as long as everything is going fine. But when it doesn't go fine, and we know sports is a game of failure, right? It is a game of failure. And athletes not always are prepared for failure.
Right.
Not always. So when you read the details of this, you'll start to see that maybe I should try to eliminate the expectation. Now, I have no problem with an athlete. I encourage an athlete to go out there and dominate. I want them to dominate. I want that kind of mindset. But if they're focused on the outcomes, and I guess the best way to answer your question, Jamie, is to expectations are sort of equal to outcomes for me in that sense. I don't want anybody focusing on outcomes. I don't think that's healthy for athletes to do. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
So we have a problem, like, and I guess, like, when I played, and it wasn't that long ago, but, like, anytime I walked into the gym, I wanted to be the best, and no, you weren't going to walk out without me being the best. We have a problem with, like, everything we do in our gym has to be framed around it being a competition, because if there is no, I guess you could say expectation or no expectation to win or an outcome to be successful, there is no drive to do something perfect or a skill. We'll do basic skills, and if we don't make them a competition, like volleyball is our sport, so if we don't do, like, you have to pass so many or you'll have this consequence, we don't get performance. If we just go through the motions and we say, okay, we're going to pass this ball for 5 minutes at this level,
Right.
we don't get it. We'll just be going through the motions. Coach told us we had to do it. But if I say we have to pass 40 balls in 5 minutes to target, then I get and if we don't, then you have to do this many touches or whatever, then I get it. Or sometimes I won't, sometimes we'll be close to it, but the drive for them to do it is different. So I guess, like, my question is, how do I eliminate expectations or an expectation for an outcome without, like, how do I limit that word without it being pressure? Because we have kids in our gym who want to be perfect, and in every drill they want to get all 40 passes. Like, I don't care who's in the drill with me, I'm gonna get all 40, and if they don't, they feel bad about themselves. And I understand that me saying you have to get this could be pressure on that kid, but for the majority of them, if I don't do it, I don't get anything out of them.
Right. You got to give them the buy-in to the reason for the drill. And I have I often recommend built-in competitions for practice to keep the level of intensity up for practice.
The self-motivation when we played and the self-motivation now is
It's
two different things.
Yeah.
Right.
And we have
Right.
to, and I agree with Morgan, is that if we say we're gonna run X number of line touches, if I don't put a time on it, you're not getting anything out of them. So you can't just do away with all expectations. I think like you said, it's the biggest thing is don't necessarily have the state championship as the goal. Have the goal as, like, Saban, win this play, and then that takes care of it.
Yeah, I believe in standards, and I think that's what you got to talk to your teams about. This is the standard that we operate on. The most successful coaches that I've been hanging around with actually have their standards and they don't compromise them. And I think that's a good way to put it. Our standard is to go 100% at this practice, and we'll talk in a minute about the importance of good practice. You know, coaches ask me all the time, how do I get them to play better? My response is simple: practice better. You got to practice like you play, because there's no way you can turn it up. I don't believe in game day players. You cannot, it's not possible for you to turn it on when you need to. You have to do what you do every day in practice. So I speak to the team about standards. You know, I mentioned that I'll talk to you about how we got Notre Dame to buy in. I talk to Notre Dame players every year about the illusion of choice. And what that means is, if you want to be great, if you want to be elite, there is no choice. Elite athletes champions do certain things and they don't do certain things, right? You don't have to be a nutritionist to stand up here and say, I hold a bag of Doritos and an apple and say, which one is better for you? What's the better choice, right? So we've all been around kids today, even college kids, who think they can have it all. I think they've been taught to think that they can have it all. Now, options are different. There are options. There are options. I'm not talking about options. I'm talking about choices. If you want to be great, there are certain things you have to do. Go back to your issue with the team. If you want to be great, there are certain things you have to do at practice. Lollygagging is not one of them, right? And so the best athletes in the world do not lollygag in practice, right? So you set a standard, you don't compromise it. It's easy to do. I have this conversation with Coach Louis Cook all the time. It's easy to turn an eye and say, we're just going to let that go today. But then you shape some bad behaviors and some bad habits. It's hard as a coach to address your standard and not compromise. And when I was talking with Nick Saban at that clinic, he said the reason a lot of coaches can't work for him long term is that he sets the standard and he will not compromise it. He said it's very hard to work for him. But what's the alternative? If you start compromising your standards, and then you start having bad habits running among your team, and then the record takes care of itself, I guess, in the end. Does that make sense? So I would prefer to use standards with coaches. Standards for practice, standards for behavior, standards for dressing, standards for classroom and grades, standards. But back to the illusion of choice, one of the reasons we got buy-in from them is that if they wanted to be champions, Notre Dame doesn't have a lot of tremendous athletes in that area. They just work hard. They outwork people. They haven't won the state championship in now 4 years, going on 5 years now. They've had sort of a string of some semifinal appearances, but nothing in the state championship. So we don't have a lot of athletes that are going to run out of sight and run away from you. So they have to work hard. Every year at Notre Dame, they don't need to be any coaches on campus for their summer workouts. They got 100% turnout for their summer workouts and not a coach is on site. And they work just as hard in the weight room, whether a coach is there or whether a coach is not. Now, I'm not bragging on Notre Dame. I'm just saying they buy into what they have to do because there is no choice. A lot of kids think they have choices. I have a son on that team. He's a junior. And I still have to poke at him a little bit. You don't have a choice if you want to be great. You either can play that video game or you can go to the gym or run some sprints or whatever you have to do. So the illusion of choice is something I go in and talk to the teams about when I'm invited, and the kids seem to get it. So any more questions about that? Good point about the expectations. And I'm not saying you can't have them. I'm just saying they're kind of dangerous when you have absolute judgments about expectations. Can you see how you can spiral out of control if you have expectations that are strict, strong? It can really chip at their confidence, and I've seen it happen in a matter of minutes with a team and with a player. Y'all seen that too? Yes. I got to throw a no-hitter. I got to go undefeated for the season. Those are all good goals, but you got to be careful that you're not focusing on that. It's okay. We at Notre Dame, we don't look at the scoreboard. We do not look at the scoreboard. We don't look at the other team as they're warming up. We just don't pay attention to all those external outcomes and things like that. We are focused on dominating each play, as you mentioned. That's our goal, okay? And when I work with other teams, we try to promote the same thing. So you can see, and this is for yours to keep. That booklet is yours. Everything in it is yours. I tried to put an assortment of things in there that you can actually do in 2 minutes with your players if you need some guidance on that. Or you can call me and I can help you out too. So yeah, that's what you'll see in every player. You'll see a mental game plan backed up by a workbook system, a lot of worksheets, and a lot of e-books and things like that I'll send them. Many of this they have to work on their own time. Usually it's after study hour and after supper, and they'll work on it. And I may go I have to kind of weave in there between practices and work with them. Best chance I get. So next, what I thought, any questions so far about anything at all? Y'all thinking about an athlete that might benefit from some of this? A couple of them? Okay. What I thought I'd do now is sort of talk about what you can do with your athletes, short of calling me and having me to work with them. You can do with them. Let's go to, I was thinking, what can you do? Let's just say it's a baseball player, and he's having trouble with focus. And like I mentioned before, the main thing we want to do is get him to play in the moment. So what I put together, if you pull up these signs, these are simple things that you can do with your athletes on your campuses, in your locker rooms, in your dugouts. When I was working with the SMU baseball players, they actually had some of these signs made for their dugouts. And it's a reminder to play in the moment and stay present. Here's one. We talked about working the process over outcome. It's a simple sign that they put up in their dugout to remind the players, process over outcome. Work the process, okay? Work the process and don't worry about the score. These are simple. We have players that put this inside their baseball hats. They might write it on their bands. They have these play bands now. They might write it on there. They can take off their bill and write it on the bill. That's something they do. Control what you can control is a sign that they put up often. Be where your feet are. Be present. Be right here, right now. That's one. Stay present's another one. So what next play? That teaches them to just flush the last play and get present. That's something. I have a college player I'm working with right now. He put that on the bill of his hat, underneath his hat. When he makes an error, that's something he can do. The ABCs of confidence was posted on the dugout at SMU as well. 200 feet. Anybody know what that one is? What's that mean? Coach? Yeah, what does that mean?
In my mind, that's like if I'm going to do something and it's not along with the rules, I'm going to do it 200 feet from that flagpole.
Yep, that's one way to look at it. Yep. The reason it's in there is because if you think of an automobile, you can only see 200 feet in front of you. You can't see really where your destination is going. You're not thinking about where your goal is, your outcome. You're thinking about the first 200 feet. What I did with the SMU players, as soon as they got on the baseball field, they would run 200 feet down the line to stretch, and then 200 feet back as a reminder that they need to stay present and stay present focus and 200 feet in front of them. So these are all simple things. It's a language that you can build out with your players. And your players will start to speak this language. Another thing that you can do is you can get with them and talk about this circle of control. Many things they probably think they're influenced by are outside. This is not colored. It's supposed to be red in here, red out here and green in here. I didn't use a color printer, but you get the idea. So most of the concerns that they have are outside that circle of control. You can talk to them about what's important and what they can control. These are little bitty exercises you can do with your players in 2 minutes. So another one that Coach Corbin over at Vanderbilt uses, I was speaking with him about something he does. He does a really cool thing that was introduced to him by a colleague of mine that was working with his team over at Vanderbilt, baseball team. He passes out an index card. This is something you can do with your players. Any sport, it doesn't matter if it's baseball or not. It happens to be baseball with this example. But he uses an index card. On the index card, he distributes to each player. They have to write a performance goal on the top and a mental conditioning goal on the bottom. Each practice, they're focusing on those goals, those process goals. It adds direction to the practice, intensity to the practice, and focus to the practice. Instead of just going out and going through the motions, they're actually working on stand down on ground balls as a performance goal and letting go of each play quickly, letting go of mistakes quickly as a mental conditioning goal. Does that make sense? And so they write that. At the end of the practice, they have to get with them for 2 minutes and evaluate how they did that day. Now, the thing about mental conditioning, it's a little a lot. You don't have a lot of time, but it's a little a lot. It's every little day for 5 minutes, 2 minutes. If you're lucky enough to have a conference room You can get your football team in there. What we do at Notre Dame is Coach Mack, the defensive coordinator, for example, might call out, what does it mean to stay in process goals? And he picks on a kid, and the kid has to say what it means. Does that make sense? He might say, what does it mean to stay in the moment and stay present? Kid has to answer that. So it's a language that's being stroked every day. Does that make sense to y'all? So it doesn't take long. It takes 2 minutes to do that, but it's a lot. And it becomes a language that they take out to the field. In 2017, I'll just share with you this too. We decided to introduce something. I had done a lot of studies on negativity, and negativity is way more positive than its counterpart, positivity. Positivity is great, but it works anecdotally. It works sometimes. It doesn't work other times. If you work with enough athletes, you begin to understand that if they've just thrown 2 interceptions, they're not wanting to hear anything positive from you, right? They're not going to say it's going to be okay. Think positive, talk positive, use some affirmations. They do not want to hear that. If you've worked with any athletes at extent and something happens, you try to get positive with them, they will shut you down. So negativity certainly doesn't work, right? Negativity works 100% of the time negatively. So I've had to come up with another language, and I call it neutral thinking. I actually stole the idea from one of Nick Saban's conditioning coaches who I got to be friends with. He passed away last year, and it was sad. He was a young guy, but he shared with me the concept of neutral thinking. Neutral thinking is this, and we have used this at Notre Dame. We used it in 2017, the last time they won the state championship. After studying the concept of negativity, there was some research done at the University of Georgetown and Harvard that said negativity, if thought, is 10 times more positive than its equal counterpart, positivity. That's 10 times. If the thought is negative, it's 4 to 7 times more positive, more powerful. That which you don't want will happen. If you say it negative out loud, it's 40 to 70 times more powerful. That which you don't want will likely happen. So what we decided to do at Notre Dame is we committed, this is something we did with the players, we committed to not saying negative stuff out loud. It's hot. Coach is not treating me right. I don't want to be here. I'm playing awful. We committed to not saying anything out loud that whole year. And if you talk to the coaches over there, they will say that contributed in large part to them winning the state championship. Now, negativity, based on the research, is bad enough. But when the kids, we had to come up with something that was neutral. Because when the kids said negative things, it was bad enough. So neutral thinking is this. When a kid throws an interception, 3 or 4 interceptions in the last 3 series, he's coming off the field. He doesn't want to hear anything positive. He certainly don't want to hear anything negative either. We don't want him to speak it out loud. So we introduced this concept of neutral thinking. Neutral thinking is this. It's the realization that what just happened was real, but it's not predictive. In other words, I just threw 2 interceptions, 3 interceptions in a row. I don't want to hear anything positive. I don't want to talk about it negative. So neutral thinking is, yes, it happened. What happened? We threw it. It's bad. It's awful. We just had an awful half. What do we do now? What are we going to do now? We don't want to talk negative, but what are we going to do now? So we go in there and we introduce neutral thinking, which is focusing on the process. Now, I'll give you an example of what our quarterback did. It's actually happened during the season. What he did was he walked into the huddle and said, I don't know about y'all, but I'm going to fight. What we're going to do is focus on first downs. The defense is playing well, right? The ultimate neutral statement is, I take setbacks as temporary, I bounce back quickly. So instead of going in the huddle and hearing positive, he didn't want to hear that. He didn't want to hear it from me. He didn't want to hear it from his coaches. Instead of going in the huddle and speaking negative, he went there and got neutral, right? Neutral is, I don't know about y'all, but I'm going to fight. Does that make sense? We had to speak something neutral, not negative, not positive. So we introduced neutral thinking. First of all, I believe so much of the things in our industry are trying to tell kids what to do, athletes what to do. Here's another thing you can take to build, to gain weight. Here's another thing you can do to be better. So much of in our industry is telling kids what to do. I think we ought to talk about what not to do. We ought to talk about what not to do. Like what not to eat, what not to say, what not to listen to, right? Now that we know it's based on evidence of negativity and how powerful that is, we do a lot of work with the Notre Dame athletes and all the high schools I work in the area, is to eliminate the negativity. That first. Because as we talked about, that's so much more powerful than its counterpart, positivity. And then we introduce the neutral thinking concepts to them. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about that?
So one thing I would chime in, volleyball was what I did in high school, a little bit of college. And I talked to my volleyball coach. She would always say, don't miss your serve. Don't miss your serve. And that was I was a defensive specialist, whatever, and I would, don't miss your serve. Sports psychology would tell you not to say that because it's negative. Sports psychology would say serve 5, serve 2.
Yep.
Give me a thing to do. Give me a place to focus my energy instead of hearing the don't part. So if your coaches are going in and you have your linebacker, don't miss the tackle, don't miss the tackle, you're focused on whoever the running back is that they're going to go after. And I think for a coach, those practical things, how do I change my vocabulary to eliminate the negative and create the positive? One of the biggest things is we have to get our athletes a place to focus. Because sometimes, they're 13, 14, 15, 16, they're all over the place anyway. All these external factors that they don't know how to eliminate yet. If we can help them as coaches focus on that one thing, that would be huge. Do you have any other suggestions?
That's a great point. I just want to follow up on that because the way the mind works, it works in action. It doesn't understand the word don't.
Right.
It's going to give you what you want. So just to follow up with that, Jamie, it's important to speak what you want, not what you don't want. So if you say don't fumble, if you give instructions to a running back or a quarterback, don't fumble, the mind hears fumble. It doesn't hear don't. It hears action words. So just as a summary, speak what you want, not what you don't want. Right? Speak what you want, not what you don't want. If you want, hold on to the ball is a better way to put that. Get a good serve. Speak what you want, not what you don't want. So, look, I got to be honest with you. Even at the state championships, there's a lot of stuff going on in people's heads. We have an ad campaign going on, over 1,000 words a minute, okay, in our heads. And so, at every level, at every championship level, at every game, there's stuff happening in your mind. It's negative. There's doubts going on. We're just asking our players not to verbalize and weaponize it against them. That's all we're asking them to do. I don't care if you're playing for the Super Bowl, there's negative and doubt that'll creep in. We're just asking them not to verbalize it. That's all. Not to give it life. So in addition to the research that we'll have on that, it's also in the Bible. I don't get spiritual, but life and death is in the power of the tongue. I knew that before I knew the research. Now, I'll tell you a story that's an interesting story. Many of you know this story, but it's a story that I tell the athletes to sort of support what we're talking about the negativity. 1986, many of you know the story of the Mets and Bill Buckner. Many of you may remember Bill Buckner was gold glove 8 times. 1986, boots that ground ball, really easy ground ball, hit to him that basically cost him Game 6 of the World Series. If you're a Mets fan, you remember that. And so what was interesting about that is that I was sitting around a couple of years later, and I actually was watching this E60 by Jeremy Schaap, where he showed Bill Buckner doing this interview 12 days before the game. And he said, it'd be great if I, caught a ball and we won the World Series based on my catch. He said, but what would be worse is if I actually had a ground ball come through my legs and I miss it. So I'm sitting there watching this, and I already knew the research, and I'm thinking, wow, Now, here's what we know. It's unlikely that the ground ball, that statement he made in that interview, 12 days, cost him to miss it. I'm not going to say that. What I will say is that I believe, personally, that he created some subconscious plant in his mind that connects to his memory. And when he's faced with adversity or stress or a slow ball hitting to him that had so much riding on it, he just missed it. So I knew about the research already, and I'm sitting there watching this, and I'm like, oh my Lord. Pistol Pete Maverick says the worst thing I could think of is I'd live to be 40 and I would die at 40 years old. Says that in an interview. What age was he when he passed? 40 years old, right? So there's all kinds of anecdotal evidence for that, but now we can back it up with a lot of empirical research about negativity and what you say. So look, teaching your athletes to not say negative stuff is easy. It's easy to do. Man, I'm not so easy for them, but it's easy to teach. You got to tell them how powerful that is, and then you get them to. And look, they were saying it's hot out here. I don't want to be out here. The mud stinks. I mean, all of that stuff was going on. We completely stopped that. And then the kids started to hold each other accountable. They started saying, nope, we don't do that. We didn't have to do it as coaches or many conditioning coaches anymore, or the defensive coordinators or offensive coordinators didn't have to do it anymore. They policed each other. And then we had complete buy-in, right? And I'm not saying that's why we won the state championship. I said it was a large reason why that team won that state championship. They believe. And we have college programs using the same type of approaches. So did I address? You wanted some other ideas?
The vocabulary we use, and that's the hardest thing for me as a coach.
Yeah.
Because you still want to say, don't miss your shot, don't fumble. It does. But I think that, and amongst the coaching staff, is a good way to practice. Talk that way to each other. The kids model that behavior.
Yeah. Now, this language is born out. Again, it was born because we didn't have a lot of time. And, when you're trying to change a behavior, you're going through a rough time. You just had a divorce. You have a kid that flunked the class. He's hurting. He's not playing well. It's a long step to get him to do things like guided imagery and meditation. I mean, to me, that's like AP chemistry. It's good, and it works, and we do use those skills with athletes. But we needed something more like a fine arts class. You know what I mean? We need something like a home ec class to introduce to them. So we start there. Okay, we start with something they can grasp and they can actually sink their teeth into right away. Make sense? I mean, if we started sitting them down and doing some imagery, we could do that with them. But a lot of times they need to start at something way more basic. Questions so far? All right, what else can we do? I gave you some, since I didn't know exactly what topics y'all would be interested in, I gave you some handouts on, here's one on guided imagery. This one has got a cool story behind it. The guided imagery exercise that I put in there for you, this was a linebacker that I was working with at one of the high schools in the Lafayette area. I created this for him, and this kid was complete. You probably had players like this. He was completely out of control in the football field. He was all over the place. He couldn't focus. He was very hard on himself. He'd throw his helmet. He would throw his mouthpiece when he made a mistake. He was completely out of control when we started working together. And so through the program, he learned to focus and calm down and focus on the process. And he got a lot better during the year. The cool thing about him is that the last play to seal the game at the end of the state championship game in the Dome, he got a pick. And so he brought me the ball. It was kind of a cool moment. We worked together for so long. And it was just, this is why I do this, because it meant so much to him to be successful and how far he had come. So that's kind of a cool thing that he actually picked off that pass at the end, because he actually got his reads right, which he never did. Got his reads right, dropped back where he was supposed to drop back, focused on what he was supposed to do, and he made the pick, sealed the game, locked up the game for him. So that was kind of a cool thing. So that's in there. If you really want to walk a kid through a guided imagery, here's a sample for you. You don't need me to be there for you. Affirmations and self-talk, it's kind of a little more of what we talked about just now, about speaking what you want, not what you don't want. The SMU pictures, I've drawn some of these out for. Some of them, I mean, belief is powerful, right? Belief is a powerful thing. And so when you start to reshape your belief system, you can walk on the mountain and feel like you can chew nails, right? Confidence is sky high. And so we do, as part of a routine, we introduce a lot of positive. I want to share a story with you about the power of belief. This is something we often talk to the teams about too, because they get it. They can understand this. It's based on behaviors, and I want to share it with you. Many of you may have heard the story already. It's about a top executive, newspaper executive. He told his story about when he was young. He had a hard time going to class. He was flunking out, wasn't doing very well. Teachers lost faith in him. But he went to take the SATs, and he actually made, the report came back, he scored a 1470 on the SATs. Many of you know it's a 1600, the highest. So goes to his mom and he says, hey, I got a 1470, I can't believe it. And she says, well, she knows her son, right? He doesn't go to class, he doesn't do anything, he doesn't study. He goes, did you cheat? You heard this story, maybe, Coach. He says, did you cheat? She asked me. No, I didn't cheat, I tried to, but they were monitoring it so well, I couldn't pull it off. I tried to, though. And he says, okay, so I got a 1470, I guess I might be pretty smart after all. I'll start going to class, I'll start hanging around with the people who study. The teachers got together and said, maybe we missed the boat on this kid, maybe we'll give him a chance, we were all wrong about him. They started treating him like a kid that was going places, and he started attending class and studying and hanging out with people who did. As I heard the story, I thought, well, that's a cool story. And the guy says, no, that's not the story. The story is this. 12 years later, they did a standard review on the test. Did you hear this, Coach?
No, but he made an error, I'm sure.
Yeah, made an error. He was one of 13 people who got the wrong scores after the review was done. So they sent him a letter saying, I'm sorry, you didn't get a 1470, you got a 760. So he says, people think that the 1470 changed my life. That's not what changed my life. Because he went on to community college, and he went on to college, and he went on to be a top newspaper executive. He said, that's not what changed my life. The thing that changed my life is I started to do things that successful people do. I started to go to class. I started to study. I started to hang out with the right people who were going places. So when I tell that to the high school kids, they get that. It's based on your behavior. It's not based on what you think or what people think of you. It's not based on outcomes, obviously. He had a 760 instead of a 1480. So they get that and they can relate to that. It's based on your behaviors. And that fits into neutral thinking too, which is the past is not predictive. The past is real, but it's not predictive. It's based on what you do next, not how you feel. It's based on what you do. It's based on your behaviors. So what we try to do with athletes is get their behaviors way out in front of their outcomes. Does that make sense? It's the behaviors. Anybody can do the behaviors. Anybody can do them. Anybody can go to class. Anybody can work hard and study. So the kids that I speak with, they really wrap their mind around that and they say, I get it. It's based on behaviors. So with the athletes, we just try to work on behaviors that are going to be conducive to them being successful. It's behaviors that matter, not how you feel. I mean, discipline is factored into that. Discipline is doing what you got to do when you got to do it the way it's got to be done. Simple as that, with a high standard. So I wanted to share that story because it's something I talk to the athletes' teams often when we get together, and they can get that. It's based on behaviors. It's also a pretty powerful story too. Another story I know about, this was probably one of the most powerful stories I've ever heard about belief is power. The story about this repairman that went into a boxcar, a train boxcar, and he went to repair a thermostat that was broken in this refrigerated cart, and he got trapped in there, and he panicked, thought he was going to be trapped and get locked in there and freeze to death. So he grabs a pad and he starts writing, colder, I'm getting colder as we go. This may be my last words. Starts writing on the frosted window. This might be it. And next morning, they opened up the boxcar, and he's not alive. He's passed. And what they found was that the boxcar, the thermostat was listed as 56 degrees. So there was no physical, it was operating fine. It was just 56. There was no real reason for his death other than they just thought he thought himself to death. So belief is powerful. And so back to these affirmations, if you can get these kids to start changing their belief system, and these are positive statements, but they're also neutral statements, you'll see a big difference. We have the athletes do this on a little index card. They'll do them daily before practice, and we'll tailor it to their sport. We'll do it daily before practice and keep it in their locker. And as they go for a quiet time before a game, they'll review them also and some of these things. So these are several examples. I'll put some samples in there for you. You can use with your own athletes. Tailor it to your sport. 2 or 3 pages about that. Focus. Focus is a little trickier because, you tell your players, just focus. And they say, that sounds good. How do I do that? Right? How do I focus, or what do I focus on? So there's some handouts there to show you how to focus. I want to make reference to this one because this is kind of a chart that you can use to walk them through it. The first thing, as we said, we want to do is focus on the task relevant cues. Well, you got to know what they are for the sport. For a pitcher, it'd be see the pitch, throw to the mitt. Those are task relevant. Breathe. That's one for pitchers too, right? So those are all things that you can identify with your athlete. Then list some top distractions. Become immersed in the task relevant cues. Refocus. So the idea is to recognize, refocus, or regroup and then refocus. Recognize, regroup, and refocus. So you'll have some things on there, and I gave you some other handouts on how we do that on the fly. So there's even a handout in there that shows you how to do it on the fly. Some sports, like basketball, they have to refocus on the fly because the game moves so fast. And so there's some samples there in there that you can help your athletes do that. You basically want them to recognize that they're off task, regroup, and then refocus. And they can do that on the fly. So any specific questions about that? Again, I didn't know which topics you guys really wanted to talk about, so I gave you a broad brushstrokes of a lot of things. So does everybody have a pen or something to write with? Y'all do? This is going to be fun. I thought we'd do this. I'm not sure you want to get this on camera, but this is an exercise I thought we'd do. The Alabama players do this, and I got this from one of their mental conditioning coaches.
Does anybody need
Yeah.
anything to write on?
You can actually write, they can write on this, Jamie.
I don't know if everybody's got a paper.
Everybody's got a grid, a concentration grid. Yes, you can have this one. Well, I need something to read from. Let's see. I think I'll stand with you. You got to partner up for this, though. Not for the first one, but you got to partner up eventually. So for the first one, everybody's got to have one. I think we're out. Yeah. Terry.
I'm sorry I came late.
That's all right. No problem. Coach, you got one? You're going to work together? All right. We're going to do this concentration grid. I thought it'd be fun.
What if you already did it?
You already did it? Oh, that's okay. That's no problem. Just ignore what you looked at earlier. Please don't flip to the second page because you're not supposed to do that. It's going to give you some hints. So this is something we do with the athletes to improve focus. So the first section of this, what I'd like you to do, without turning the page, I'd like you to just, what we're going to do is we're going to go 60 seconds, okay? When we start, you're going to flip the page. You're going to start in descending order. Now, everybody's going to do this alone for the first time. You're going to start, I'm going to give you a number. You're going to find that number on the chart and then go in descending order for the first 60 seconds, okay? Until I call time, all right?
Another explanation, I'm sorry.
Okay, yes, I just gave my sheet away with the directions, but I'm going to go by memory. What you're going to do is you're going to start when you turn the page. I'm going to give you a number. You're going to find that number on the grid. Don't do it yet. You're going to find that number on the grid, and then you're going to start looking for the next number in descending order. So I'm going to give you a number. Say it's 10. You're going to go 10, 9, 8, and down the line, okay? And we're going to see how many you can do quietly in the first 60 seconds, okay? Everybody understand what they're doing? All right, when I tell you to flip it, I'm going to give you 60 seconds. I'm going to give you a number. The number is 77. 77. Flip it and go in descending order. Cross it out as you get it. Put an X on it. Yep, go.
Can we keep it? Got it.
Cross them out as you get them. Okay, stop. Do not switch, do not flip the page. Stop. How hard was that? Pretty tough. What are you noticing is going on when you're looking for the numbers? Pardon?
See numbers that you're gonna get to.
Yeah.
There's some internal ad campaign going on in your head, right? It's hard to focus. Okay, we're going to switch it up a little bit. This time, I want you to pick a partner. Don't flip the page yet. Pick a partner, and as one person can do it at a time and start and mark it off. But I want the partner to be silent and just stare at them. Okay? Just stare at them while they're working. All right? Same type of deal. We're gonna go a minute. Let me give you a number. Let me see. Okay, I'll do 83 this time. Okay. You got to flip the page, and the number is 83. Now, no talking, just staring at your partner. Stare at your partner while he's working or she's working.
Stare at their face.
Stare at them. Bear down on them.
Get in their business.
That's right. Imagine you're the offensive lineman across from the defensive lineman. Intimidate them. No talking, just stare and be an imposing presence.
Some of y'all are soft. I would expect more intensity.
No talking. We'll do enough talking on the next one. That's it? Okay, that's it, Jamie?
Yep.
Stop. Stop. Don't turn the page. That's for the next session. Don't turn the page. Was that harder or easier? About the same. About the same. Okay.
I'm just going to say, if y'all are like giving direction on how to be an intensely imposing person, I'm a little nervous because y'all like, you like gotta be good. Like,
Some of these guys I wouldn't want staring at me. I mean, they look pretty tough. Okay. Now, here's where we're going to have fun. This time, don't flip the page yet. Swap it over. And use the same partner. Let the same partner that was writing last time do the same thing. This time, I want you to trash talk them.
oh yeah.
Now, look, guidelines. Guidelines. No cursing, no four-letter words. Okay? Just get in their ear and trash talk them. Okay?
Are we starting before we stop?
No, I'm going to give you another number. I'm going to give you a new number. What's that number?
Ready? 33.
33. Okay. Start. Number is 33. Go. Come on, trash talk them now. Some of them need some lessons in trash talk. You should see the players.
My contact,
Okay, stop. Stop, that's good. All right. All right, that was fun. All right, what did y'all find then? What did y'all find out? Anybody wanna offer an impression? What was going through your head when they were trash talking you? Was it easier? Yeah. Usually that's the lowest score for the athletes. Now they have a lot of fun with this. Now I'll tell you, some of y'all need a lesson in some trash talk, because some of the athletes can get kind of
They
wild.
also have less rules.
Yeah. We just tell them not to curse, not to use any four-letter words, but they can get funny. Some of these kids have a different language. They get funny. So the idea is this. Focus can be trained. Concentration can be trained. If you're in a loud venue, you can get easily distracted. So we work with the players all year long on this. This is pretty much a regular type of exercise that we do. And you can see, obviously, you can see the benefits of it. If they'll learn to disconnect from anything that's external, and they'll learn to get really good at focusing on staying in the moment, playing one play at a time. So it's a very useful thing. It's kind of a light exercise. It's fun. The kids love it. I'm always surprised at some of the language that they come up with. I have a teenager and I'm still not understanding what they're saying sometimes. It's some of the terminology that they use for each other. If you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. So can you see how that would be a useful exercise to really groom a kid to be focused? And now, you can take those with you. If you want me to send you some other grids or other information, feel free to just email me. I'll leave my email. I think my email is on the flyer that I gave you. But so that's fun. That's a fun thing to do. Any questions about anything so far at this point? Anybody have any questions about anything? All right. Let's keep going. I gave you some things on routines. Now, let's talk about some routines. Routines are a great way to stay focused. I usually, it's a little bit more of a challenge to work with routines for football players, because football is kind of it's a 20-second break before you have to do it again. So I'm going to use the example of a baseball player, a pitcher. Some of the routines we do. And I'm going to show you some of the things that we actually work with athletes. So a pitcher, for example, what we'll do with him is create some routines that they can use either in the game or they can use in practice when they're doing their pins. Okay? So we create a routine for a pitcher that might be breathe. I want them to take a focused breath when they get on the mound. So they breathe when they're on the mound. They envision what pitch they want to throw. They see it, and then they do it. So if they're going through a practice pin, they would actually go through a practice pin, going through these routines, even if there's no catcher there. So they would go through their routines. And I create tailor-made routines for each player, depending on whether they're a pitcher or they're a second baseman or a catcher or whatever. I'll use the example of a pitcher. So they basically want to have a routine where they're breathing, they're imagining the pitch they want to throw, they see the pitch they want to throw, and then they throw it. And they focus on a performance cue or a trust cue, like throw to the mitt or hit the target. So see it, do it. Just see it and do it. So we'll create sort of individual routines for each other. So let's talk about some ways that an athlete would let go of a mistake. There's a lot of ways we can do that. We talked about writing something on the hood of the cap or on their band, play one play at a time, flush the last play, so what next play. Created this for a second baseman last week. He was in a slump making some errors, and so I taught him to sort of imagine that he has a circle of control or a circle of influence around his area, and when he steps out of that, he deals with it. He takes his hat off to let the steam off. He might shake it. He might kick some dirt, right? He might pick up some dirt and throw that error away. And he doesn't step back into his circle of influence or circle of control until all that's behind him and he's back. Does that make sense for everybody? So there's a lot of things you can work with your players on. A pitcher's an easy one. If he's thrown, he threw a pitch and it ended up in a home run, he steps off the mound. He might pick up some dirt and throw it as if he's throwing away that last pitch, right? Of course, he has things in his hat too. I like to teach them when they go up there and they kick the rubber off. He's not kicking dirt off the rubber. He's in his mind imagining that he's just kicking that last play away. There's a lot of things you can do with them there. We do that with those pitchers. What else? You'll see batters a lot of times when they lose their focus, they might step out, and you'll see batters doing this routinely now because they all do the same routine. They'll adjust their batting gloves. You'll see that a lot, right? And so they're not really adjusting their batting gloves because they are loose. They're adjusting their batting gloves because they're either throwing away the last pitch or they're resetting for a new pitch. You'll see them always breathing. They'll look at the bat and get centered with the bat. What they're doing there is they're visioning hitting the ball on a line drive or hitting it in the gap somewhere hard. That's what they're doing there. They're breathing and getting reset, and they're doing their visualization at that time. You'll see when they step out and take a practice swing, they're not just taking a practice swing to warm up. They envision themselves hitting it hard in the gap somewhere. So all those routines are taught. If they get distracted, they just step out and they do the routine over again. Y'all notice that when y'all watch? It was all over the World Series. They were all doing it in the World Series, adjusting their gloves. They're taught to do that. You can teach that to your players too. It's just routines to keep them in the moment and focused. Okay, anybody have any other ideas? What do y'all do with y'all players? What do you tell them? What do you tell your pitchers when they had a bad inning?
You got no baseball or softball coaches in here.
Oh, you don't? Okay, just football?
I don't think
Free throws, you have.
Free throws.
basketball,
Yep.
volleyball.
Free throws.
Free throws?
Make them do
Yep.
the same thing every
Yep.
time.
Yep. When I lived in Texas, I got to spend some time with Michael Johnson. Y'all know Michael Johnson? Michael Johnson, probably for 11 years, he was the best sprinter in the world. And what a phenomenal guy he is. One of the most focused people I've ever met. His was his routine when he got into the blocks. He shared it with me. He said he would explode out of the blocks, pump his arms, and think bullet. So he was exploding, he was pumping his arms, and he was envisioning a bullet going through the air. That was his approach. So, I mean, everybody has their thing, but work with your athletes on a routine to keep them focused on things like that. I have some instructions on how to do that in here. If you'd like me to send you a routine workbook, I will be glad to send it to you. If you just get with me after, I'll get your email down and I'll send you. It actually is more detailed on how to set a routine for them. How are we doing on time, Jamie? Are we good?
We're about an
Yeah.
hour and a half into it.
Okay. So I thought I'd open it up, the rest of it, to some questions and answers. I want this to be interactive. What do you envision having your kids benefit from the most? Whether we talked about it today or not, maybe you have something else you'd like me to talk about. Anything at all? Mostly?
I think what I picked up is also in April at the Nick Saban camp, there was a speaker who spoke on changing your tone and the way you talk. So instead of saying, "Oh man, I can't do this," like kind of like what you and her were talking about earlier. And I think that's one of the biggest things, and I like what you said about the team who just got away from all don't say anything negative for the year. I think that's something that I want to try and implement.
Yeah, you know, you have buy-in when the kids are policing each other after a while. They're saying that's not the way we do it. You know, I'll pick a school like STM. That's not the way we do it at STM. We do it this way. And so that's when the coaches tell me they know you have buy-in, because the kids are policing themselves now. You don't have to go and remind them. And if you have buy-in from 100 kids, you got a movement. I mean, you got some power there. They're all holding each other accountable. So about the language, that's just one thing to get buy-in. This idea of choice, that's another thing to get buy-in. I mean, I don't know how many programs get 100% attendance for summer workouts with the coaches not there. I don't know how. I mean, I've never experienced that before from anybody, but that's just a sort of a traditional thing they know they have to do to work out. But they also buy into the, and they commit to the program. Anybody else have any questions about anything we've talked about?
One of the things that I did coming in as a new coach last year on year 2 was I would create a slogan, and one of the things I didn't want my kids to focus on was trying to be perfect. Because we all know, and we're real with ourselves, everyone is not perfect. There's no perfect individual in the world. So I asked them to be Terrebonne perfect, right? And was that's just being 110% committed to the program, because it'll be our job to set some kind of standard or expectation, and our expectations is going to vary, because when you talk football, you have to break it down not only about offense or defense, but you have positions. Position coaches are going to have their own expectation, defensive coordinator, vice versa. So I just asked them to be committed to the program and do what the program needed to do as far as inside of the classroom, the community, and also in the locker room. So they already know coach don't have that high expectation of me trying to be perfect or you being an overachiever. Because being an overachiever, trying to focus on overachieving is going to take you from your real focus. That is doing your part for the team. Because everybody has a piece of the puzzle that needs to be put together to make a big picture. So we talk about that a lot as well. And just being transparent.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's an awful lot of emphasis right now being placed on culture in programs. You can go to any college clinic you want to and meet with coaches. They are putting a lot of emphasis on culture. And as they should. And the way they describe it is, a lot of these kids are coming from households where there really wasn't a whole lot of culture or standard or even the social skills. We all know as professionals that there's been a big decrease in social skills in our kids. I mean, I can see that from the mental health side, and I can also see it from an athletic side. They lack the social skills because they're not honing them as much as they used to, because they're not interacting in person as they used to be. These video games and these cell phones. Just the other day, I'm walking out on campus at one of the colleges, and 2 girls are sitting on the bench talking to each other on the phone, texting each other. And I said, "What are y'all doing?" They said, "We're talking." I said, "Well, you're texting each other." And I said, "Why are you doing that instead of talking to each other?" And they said, "Because we don't want anybody to hear." I'm like, there's nobody around, right? So we can see as professionals, teachers, coaches, that these kids don't have the same social skills or skill sets that they used to have because of the age we're in. So a lot of coaches are having to do that. They're having to teach kids how to settle things like conflict resolution, how to communicate with each other. We're actually having to do that, which is why these top 5 power conferences are now introducing mental conditioning coaches to sort of help with that, to develop kids as a whole. You know, and Jamie and I have talked about this, where this component, I believe, is so needed. It's so needed, and it's, you know, if we're able to do this, Jamie would be responsible for pioneering a whole industry, okay? Bringing this on to athletes where they're covered with PT, they're covered with orthopedic, they're covered with all the medical things. The trainers are there. What they don't have, you know, it's been estimated that 5 to 10% of performance is mental. I mean, a mind's a small part of the body, but it's like a steering wheel of a car, but it gets you where you need to go, right? So the reason why, for example, Nick Saban brought this on so strongly is because he wasn't about to leave that 5% to chance. Now, we talked about an edge he was always looking for. And now Kirby Smart, Jimbo Fisher. All these coaches now are bringing this on. They're bringing teams of mental conditioning coaches because that 5% can make the difference in winning or losing. And in the pros, in college, you don't win, you're out. So they're not leaving that 5% the chance. They're taking advantage of it. At this level of a high school, I think it's a missing piece. I've heard Jamie use that terminology before, right? It's a missing piece that we are just not treating the whole athlete. That's all. Do y'all agree that this piece is absolutely beneficial for somebody at the high school level?
Yes.
Who's teaching these kids how to cope with an injury, right? Who's teaching them that? I got a kid in my own house, he's had 3 tears on a hamstring, and he's not sure how to handle that. Fortunately, I can help him through it, right? So from a rehab standpoint, that alone is valuable for a kid who loses his confidence. How do I get back? How do I know my place in the team now? Am I still on the team or am I not on the team? I mean, I'm at practice, but I'm not practicing. How does the team see me? How do I see them? See, those are all things they have to navigate through to figure it out. And so you can help them through that. They have a team of people in their rehab that can help them through that. PTs are enormously helpful there, right? Trainers are enormously helpful there, aren't you? Don't y'all talk to kids about those types of things? Yeah, but if you had a system to be able to work with and some additional support, it would be a lot easier. So just from a rehab standpoint, mental conditioning training is important. Not to mention from a team standpoint and what we can do to maximize performance there. Everybody suffers with confidence. Everybody struggles with focus. You just did an exercise a minute ago that it showed you how much it's difficult to focus when you're distracted. So these are skills that are useful for these kids, but who's going to introduce it? And when? I'm struggling to get 5 minutes in a college program. They actually have 20 hours a week between nutrition, mental conditioning, strength training that the NCAA handcuffs them with. 20 hours a week total. And so I often hear you got 5 minutes. But it's a little a lot, right? It's a little a lot. And we chip at it 5 minutes at a time. Anything else? Any other questions about anything? Good stuff. I like the culture building and the standard that you set. You got to work on X's and O's. I get it, and that primarily takes much of the practice, right? But this 5%, it's been estimated also that when the game and during competition, that flips. And now it's mental 90% and the physicals 10, depending on the sport. Something like golf and tennis and things like that, it can flip. It become really mental then.
If I could chime in just at the end,
Yeah,
Tony. I mean, Tam,
sure.
if you got anything else? If not,
Nah, I'm just going to take questions.
Okay.
So I know everybody at some point is dealing with this. You have your athletes that are not mentally present at the time. What's some tips and tricks that you can get to the athlete to actually get them present to where they're at, where they need to be, because their head's out everywhere else but where it needs to be? What's some tips and tricks that we can
Excellent.
utilize for that?
Excellent question. This is something that you can use immediately. That's a great question. As we discussed, these kids are distracted by so much, right? They're overstimulated with all this technology that they have. And so being present at practice. So what we do, what I introduce with players and with teams is I teach them how to park their concerns or distractions, and knowing when to become a player. Like at the college level, they got so many things going on, even at the high school level. So you have to mentally prepare them to park whatever distraction. So what we do is we determine where they're going to park that. Are they going to park that in the car? Are they going to park that when they hang their clothes up in the dressing room? So that's part of their routine, their pre-practice routine is they have to determine, and I think I have something in there about that for you. So they have to determine when they're going to actually become an athlete. At what point are they going to become an athlete? I have athletes going through a ritual when they dress, that they're parking their distractions there, and they're becoming an athlete. They're literally visioning themselves putting on a coat of armor when they put their uniforms on. So they have a routine that goes through that. We've had baseball players, this is something we introduced at SMU too. The coach had a line that was drawn on as soon as they stepped onto the field house, they were an athlete. So mentally, they knew when they crossed, it was a visible sign for them. When they crossed over that line, they were now athletes. You can put that on the baseball field too. You can put that on the football field when they cross the track. It's a mental thing. Some of the kids hit something that's written on a pole when they leave the dressing room, just win or something like that, or win, or play hard, or whatever it is. They hit that, that's when they mentally become. But I think you should do it way before when they're dressing, right? It's a go signal that they're now a baseball player or a football player. So a good question. You can either do that. When I'm working with athletes and no team has anything in place, I want them parking their distractions when they park their vehicle, if they're driving. Look, it'll be there when they get back. All the distractions will be there. But now we're a football player. Now we're a baseball player. And I'm not thinking about it. But that's training. That takes training to compartmentalize like that. But very good question. That's something that we get a lot. Does that make sense to everybody? You can be creative how you want to do that in your programs. But I work with athletes on when do you want to become a football player? At what point? When you exit the car, when you're hanging up your uniform, whenever it is. Now, I want to say this too before I leave. I spend an awful lot of time with kids and athletes and teams to decouple who they think they are and who they really are as a football player. What I mean is separate their identity as a football player and their identity as a person. Does that make sense? Because sometimes if you play poorly, you think you're a bad person. I mean, they stink. They really, y'all have experienced that, right? You can't console a kid at the end of the game because he played so poorly. And I spent a lot of time, because of now the emphasis on being perfect, we have a lot of pressure from kids, we have a lot of pressure from parents. Y'all have parents that y'all deal with, I'm sure. And sometimes the parents can really really get in the way. Most of the time when I'm working with individual athletes, I have to work just as much with the parents as I do with the athlete. Because I'm telling the kid to not focus on outcomes, and as soon as I leave, the parents are in there about throwing a no-hitter the next day, right? And so a kid will start to sort of pull together his identity as a ball player and as a person. So what I try to do is I have to separate that a lot from him and say, baseball is what you do, this is who you are. And that's a huge piece. Baseball is what you do when you're between the lines. Who you are is who you are when you leave. They're not the same. And so that can really be a struggle for kids. They'll leave after a game, after giving up a home run and lose the game, and they just feel awful about themselves. Yes, they played poorly, but that's not who they are. Does that make sense? Yes. So I have to peel that away. And we have ways that we do that with some self-esteem work and some self-image work that I use with some exercises. Yes?
That was going to be my question. Like, practically, how do you do that? Because as an athletic trainer, often they lose their identity is in their skill or their ball playing ability. And when they get hurt, they can no longer do that. They don't know what to do because they don't know who they are. So
yeah.
Practically, how do you do that?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of how I do it. I create a confidence resume, and I do a lot of self-esteem work with them, like, who are you as a player and who are you as a person? And we kind of separate those two lists, who they are as here and who they are as a player here. So I do a confidence resume. It's in one of my workbooks. If you found the confidence one, it's in there. So that's one of the techniques I use. But they have to constantly work on that and to let it go, to compartmentalize and say, I'm no longer a baseball player. Now I'm going and I'm a friend now, and I'm a son to someone, and I'm a good person. So it's a lot of self-image work that I do with them. But it is a problem because the expectations and the outcomes are so heavy on them. I mean, their parents are always telling them you have to play well to get a scholarship. I mean, there's a lot of pressure, external pressure.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, when I played, like, my coach wanted me to shoot the ball so much and, play great. But, like, these kids, like, I know everybody here, I got some kids, like, the players and the parents expect the next shot to to make it to the league. You know, like they putting a lot of pressure. And I find myself, I'm just, hey, learn to love the game. You know, I talk to them a lot about learning to love the game for yourself, not for anybody else. But what are some other things I can get them to just like focus on being a good teammate, just being the best player you can be for your team?
Yeah, and they need to hear that often. And they need to remember to have some fun.
My coach wanted me to just, you know, shoot that next shot.
Yeah, a lot of confidence in you. But yeah, just remember, it's a game, right? It's supposed to be fun. Yes, we want to win, and I think our goal should be to win. I think ultimately, you know, winning matters. I mean, right? If you're coaching, winning matters. It does matter, but it's not something that you want to do with players and tell them, this is what we need to win, or we want to win, or we need to win. Yes, we want to win. Many coaches I work with, they don't talk about winning at all. They're talking about dominating the play. Dominate each play. The scoreboard usually takes care of itself if you can do that. Win the play, dominate the man across you, focus, play with energy. Energy's huge. Play with energy and confidence and enthusiasm. The scoreboard is an outcome that usually takes care of itself. So I started off by saying what we ultimately try to do is get the kids to play in the moment. Why? Because it's the only thing they can control. It really is the only thing they can control. Is this, any of us. It's the only thing we can control is what we do right now. Behaviors are big. And so the reason I ask them to work on process goals is because focusing on outcomes is playing ahead, and focusing on past mistakes is playing behind. Neither one of those we can control. And you're going to perform your best if you focus on what you can control right this moment. So all of these skills and all of these exercises are all common in one thing. We're trying to get the kid to stay in the moment, to focus on what we can control and control the controllables. Yeah.
I wonder if you could just help me out, like, to advance something I do. I give my girls a pack of, I coach basketball. I give my girls a pack of sticky notes. Each week they got to put on the locker a sticky note. They got to write down a practice goal and a game goal if we got one that week. And the practice goal could be like, be a better rebounder, a better talker, a better communicator, a better anything, you know what I'm saying, something to work on. And also I have each player walk around, initial, okay, I saw you do this, saw you do that, like just a positive reinforcement. How can I make that better?
Well, I like the accountability piece because you get them to check off on each other, and that's good. I think you should, once goals are movable. So I like the fact that you have performance goals and some mental goals there, but you kind of want to keep moving the stick. As soon as they feel like they've consistently achieved that, always strive for a higher standard. So
yeah, we do that. Each week we try to get better at
increase.
What we're trying to accomplish. Like, I just want to know how I can make it, like, I guess more team oriented. Like, how can I involve the team more with what we're trying to do so far? I would build in some competitive things with the team. Recognize people for their achievements. The most powerful praise you can get is publicly. And so we do that a lot too with some of these teams. If somebody's been working extra hard, we try to pull that out and praise them for that publicly. Show them as a model for what they're doing to reach the standard. I don't know if you're doing that or not, but we do that. We don't do it public, we just do it in-house and just such and such for this week or something like
Yep.
that, you know?
Yep.
But making it public, I like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. We'll get them in a conference room, and we'll get one of the coaches to come up and say somebody's going the extra mile in his workouts, and we'll pull them up and recognize them. That's powerful for them. And also pose the other kids, like, how do I get that? They might give them some sort of an award or something, but how do I get that? I want that too. So I try to build into programs some internal competition all the time. There's a reason why I think most of the best college coaches will have first team going against first team. We're going to play against the best, and we're going to challenge each other every day. So, I think you cannot underestimate the power of building a healthy culture. You have a language based on some core principles, and you do not compromise that culture. You do not compromise those principles or your standard. Just establish a standard and then don't compromise it. And once you got buy-in, you got an army. In whatever sport. Yep. Put a high emphasis on character because your job's a lot easier when you do that. Yep. Any other questions? We good? We about out of time, aren't we? Yeah. Yeah, I can't tell you how much fun I had, but I'm happy to, if you have a specific skill that you want me to hone in on, I'm happy to come down and talk to your team about it, if it's confidence or if it's focus, or if it's letting go of mistakes, or if it's culture or anything like that you want to build. I'm happy to come and do that for you specifically. We kind of took some broad brushstrokes today because I wasn't sure what concepts or what topics you wanted to address today. But hopefully it was helpful to you. I want to wish you all good luck with your teams this year. Hope everybody's real successful. If there's anything I can ever do for you, my number's on that flyer. Okay?
Thank Terry Daniel again. He came, he's not chose to be here. He came because he believes in this program, he believes in this idea, and his contact information is there. I also want to let you know that I want to be a resource for you. If you want to contact me and I can be helpful to trainers. I do want to talk to you about your injured athletes for just a second. If you have a kid that gets injured and they show up to the clinic, this is what it looks like, especially our prolonged injured kids. This is how we speak to them. This is not a life-ending injury. This is a pausing injury. Some kids return to play, some kids don't, but we don't focus on that. We say usually the Lord is pausing them. And if they only see themselves as that quarterback, as that point guard, as that hitter, we tell them this is a pause moment because this has become the focus of your life. And they want me to find out who you are. There's two athletes, one from Terrebonne, one from Vanderbilt, that personally have changed the trajectory of the way I care for athletes. Because with both of them, I met with them. We did goals. I taught them smart goals. I gave them videos to watch. They met with me when they couldn't meet with you because it would kill them to go to practice and watch. So they came. They met with the trainers, and the trainers sat with them and reinforced the idea that your identity is not yourself as a quarterback, as a defensive tackle. That's not who you are, it's what you do. Throughout their whole processes, we fed to their brain when we couldn't feed their body. And that, if you see a kid, even if they don't get to orthopedics, if you see a kid that's sidelined and can't play, give me the chance to work with them. Give me the chance. This is a kid, for the most part of his life, he showed up, he gets out of school at 3 or 10 or whatever time we get out, and goes right to practice and does this thing or her thing, and now she can't. So she gets out of school and she doesn't know what to do. Because all the people that she does stuff with are going to practice and she can't. Give me a chance to work with her. Give me a chance to say, you come meet with me. And if it's not me, it's somebody on my team. But we give them something to do. They have purpose. If you notice the kid's not eating, not hanging out with their people, that's all the sign that their brain is hurt, not just their ankle, not just their shoulder. We are an orthopedic clinic, but we want to buy into the kid. Because that's what we should do with adults. We all have been exposed to athletics in some kind of way. We chose to make it part of our life. We know the benefits that it can be. But like you just said, Terry, when it gets wrapped up and that's all they are, parents look at me and say, do you know how much money I've invested in this kid playing soccer? And I'm like, and you're telling me he can't play this should be? That's exactly what I'm saying. I've had your athletes come in and say, I can't say I don't want to play, but I don't want to play. Give them a chance to be true to who they are. Give them a chance to do that, those expectations. I wrote down a few things because, like you said, it's a big, broad brush. It's like drinking from a fire hydrant, all the information at once. But these are just some take-homes that I wrote down and I want to share with you. Stuff we can do today. When you go back to your teams and start practice. Eliminate the negative talk immediately. Start with your coaching staff. We're not going to talk negatively on our coaching staff, and we're going to buy that in. Our position coaches are going to do it. However we break it out, we're stopping the negative talk immediately. We'll get our kids to buy in from there. Establish your standard and don't compromise. Silence is acceptance. If I look at Jamie and she's a stud and she's half walking on that drill and I don't call her out on it, that's an example to the rest of the team. If you see it, you have to address it because silence is acceptance either way it goes. A little, a lot. A little bit over a long period of time, you make big changes there. Right. It's huge. Expectations can be dangerous. The process should be the focus. How do we get to that goal? How do we get to that expectation? Eliminate the external distractions. You got a bunch of little handouts on there. Phrases of focus. I love the idea of my different coaches having a different phrase of focus. And I might say, so what, next play? So what, next play? Kid comes to me, they screwed up. I'm coaching 7 to 8-year-old flag football right now, your future athletes. So what, next play a lot? So what, next play a lot? But whatever it is, the routine, that's something that we can taught, that can be repeated, that's going to create better outcomes, and it's important. And each kid needs a different one. I'm the ADD kid. I'm your focus problem, right? Affirmations are big. That's your index card affirmation that puts in the locker room. I belong here. I prepare for this moment. I have what it takes to be successful. This is my time. Have your players read whatever their affirmations are. Tony, Terry, you can help them go through there and create. One, you can do this today. First practice. And this is what you're going to say every day. And what you repeat, you believe, and what you believe you become, right? Have them say it every day. I'm 6'4", hasn't worked for me yet, but I still say it. Cultivate your culture. Establish what your culture is going to be. Then teach your players what it's going to be. Insist on it, because behavior is big. Behavior is big. And the last thing, the biggest thing for me, because I see it with your injured folks, is identity versus position. There are players that the team needs because they're fantastic, but a lot more times they are players that need the team. And those are the kids that need to hear it. And I don't love you because you're scoring 40 every game. And I don't love you because you've never missed a field goal. I love you because you show up every day. You try every day. And your attitude is fantastic. And that's what I love about you. Our team needs you. But I'm particularly drawn to the kids that need the team more than I need them, right? They need me. They need a place to go after school. They need a place to belong, to call family, because they don't know what that feels like. I was a poor kid that didn't really fit in when I was little, so I became an athlete because I wanted to just punish the people and didn't want to hang out with me because I had buck teeth, freckles, warts. I was Quasimodo. But that's where I found my fit in on the playground playing ball. I'm inspired by you as coaches. You put in more time than anybody gives you credit for. You don't get paid nearly as much, but I know your motivation comes from here. And that's what motivates us at Gulf Coast, especially me. And if we can do anything for you, anything, Jamie, I think this is a need. I think we can do better here. Try to make it to your games as much as I can, but know that you can get me. You can get me through Brad. You can get me through your trainer. You can get me at the clinic. Whatever we can do. We want this region, this parish to succeed, not just because of the accolades, but because what it can do for these coaches. So thank you so much for showing up today and taking part of your time. And Terry, thank you again
It was my
for coming on
pleasure.
your
I
time.
appreciate all the